one person who I'm always happy to have the chance to interview and talk to is Andy Rothman. Andy has been writing about Asian businesses and U.S. Asia trends for most of that time. Before he entered the financial industry, Andy was also a distinguished diplomat for the U.S. And focused on China. Great to see you, Andy. Thanks for joining us. You just came back from a trip through Greater China. Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw there?
Great to be with you, Russell. Thanks. Yeah, it's been great to be able to get back to traveling again after being out of Asia for 3 years during COVID. I first went back to the region in February, went to Taipei, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen. And then just a few weeks ago, I had an opportunity to go back to Shanghai, where I lived for 14 years, and to Beijing, where I lived for 5 years. I'd like to share three main takeaways from that trip. The first is that I think Chinese people are living with COVID, just like the rest of us are. I know people have been hearing that there has been an increase in cases, and that's true. There are cases there, but just like here, nobody that I met was changing their behavior, and there were certainly no new government COVID restrictions. So it's pretty much like it is in the United States right now in terms of living with COVID. The second takeaway is that what I saw on the streets, in offices, and bars and restaurants was consistent with the macro data, which is telling us that a gradual consumer-led recovery of the Chinese economy is underway. Now, this recovery is moving in fits and starts. Some months are stronger than others, but that's not surprising given that Chinese people are in the process of shaking off a lot of trauma last year from COVID and from zero COVID restrictions. But I think that the improvements in income, and particularly in the services and consumer space, are sustainable. And I think that if we're patient, we're going to see the Chinese economy gradually get back to where it was pre-COVID. And then the third takeaway is about US-China relations. Just a little while ago, we heard that Nick Burns, the CIA director, made a secret trip to China last month at the same time that Biden sent Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, on a then secret trip to Vienna to meet with his Chinese counterpart. And I think this reflects what I heard in Beijing, which is that everybody is depressed by the sharp deterioration in the bilateral relationship. And everybody I spoke to in China is worried about that. Everybody I spoke to in China wants it to improve. I certainly didn't hear any anti-American sentiment while I was in China. But they also came away with something that matches my impression, which is that while the Biden administration wants to put a floor under the relationship, they're not really yet willing to take concrete steps to improve the relationship. For example, they haven't lifted the Trump-era sanctions on the Chinese defense minister, which would allow our defense secretary to sit down and resume conversations with him. So I think this means that there's going to be continued tension between Washington and Beijing, but a crisis is unlikely. And so this tension is going to weigh on investor sentiment, particularly here in the US, but it should not get in the way of the economic recovery.
What could get in the way of the of the economic recovery? What are some of the potential drags on that, and how serious are they?
Yeah, I'm, as I said, optimistic that we're going to continue to see a gradual recovery. I'd highlight three challenges that the Chinese economy is facing right now. Two of them are very connected, and that is that we've seen a weak manufacturing recovery, especially weak compared to consumption. And we've also seen really weak investment by private companies in China. This is important because privately owned entrepreneurial companies are the engine of growth in China. They account for almost 90% of urban employment today, which is an amazing change from when I first went to China as a student in 1980, or when I first went there as a junior American diplomat in 84. At that time, there were no private companies at all. You couldn't even find a privately owned restaurant. Today, it's, as I said, 90% of employment, almost all of the new job creation, and all of the wealth and innovation creation. And they've been reluctant to invest coming out of COVID and out of some rhetoric that made them nervous about how the government felt about private companies. The third challenge is that unemployment among young people is really high. Youth unemployment, age 16 to 24, is running at about 20%, which is very high. We saw something similar to that in the United States, and it's come down a lot. And I think in China, it will come down as well. Part of the reason that that rate is so high is that there's been a huge increase in the number of university graduates over the last decade. It's gone from 7 million a year to almost 12 million a year. And also, China lost about 30 million services jobs during COVID, and those are just gradually coming back. So I think those are the three challenges that I'd highlight.